I was thinking back to when I first saw the trailer to Warwick's VGU, and I remember how terrifying it was. Everyone going crazy after watching Fiddlestick's trailer when there's an even scarier one that came out 4 years prior, and it sent a message. This was the watershed moment that made me realize reworks are not just a small project. If they were going as far as making an entire CG animated trailer on a champion literally no one played, we're in for quite a surprise. Just before starting on this script, I rewatched the trailer and I realized something. After seeing Arcane and all the subtle hints and factors pointing to who Warwick is, or rather who he used to be, I wonder if this was always who he was or if they retconned it. Cause I'm like, how the hell did they plan this far ahead? Not gonna spoil it just in case you haven't seen Arcane, you should though, great show. As the longtime veteran of League's roster, Warwick was a priority target for Riot's ambitious visual gameplay updates. While his design wasn't the most problematic, it was definitely a far cry from what he could be, and I think that was the motivation for why they selected him as the next target. Prior to Warwick, they just got off of finishing Yorick, Ryze, Taric, Shen, and Poppy, 3 of which having designs that, while functional, were extremely limited in scope, making them very stat-checky in nature, usually for the wrong reasons. Warwick just so happened to be one of them. Instead of creating updated abilities that could do more things and call it a day, they decided to go the extra mile by testing out some new mechanics, birthing a champion who, by every definition, should be in the top 5 best reworks of all time, if not the best. The VGUs that succeed in my opinion are the ones that fully preserve the important parts of a champion's identity and playstyle while incorporating modern standards for skill expression, outplay potential, and player agency. They passed all of that with flying colors, and as the cherry on top, created arguably one of the most balanced champions in League of Legends history. Let's hunt down Warwick's Rework, a retrospective. Similarly to Pantheon and Kayle, there really wasn't a sense of urgency for redesigning Warwick. He was a perfectly functioning champion who was easy to understand and pick up, especially for players who wanted to learn how to jungle, and in all honesty, his presence in solo queue wasn't half bad, quite strong in fact. During Season 4, his pick rate was incredible, hovering in double digits for the better part of the year. Although Feral Flare was responsible for that, coming out in version 4.5, an item that dealt bonus on hit magic damage, scaling infinitely for every large monster and champion takedown. Seeing as Warwick's entire game plan consisted of whacking you to death, this item was perfect on him, and so for the entirety of Season 4 he basically destroyed everyone with it. That is, until version 4.20 when Feral Flare was removed and subsequently replaced by Devourer, which had the same basic principle. As a result, Warwick had to receive significant nerfs in 4.20 and 21, increasing the cooldown on his ultimate, decreasing the base damage by a full 100 at rank 1, that's gotta hurt, and cutting the duration of his attack speed buff in almost half. The nerfs were enough to end his reign of terror, regressing him into a pocket pick for the next 2 years. Despite that, Warwick still performed quite well, and the few times players did try him out, his great sustain, brainless ganking and lockdown, and hilariously silly gameplay made him a token treat. To give an example of what I mean, allow me to introduce you to one of the funniest clips I've ever seen in the 8 years I've been playing this game.
Where you going? That's the champion right there, dude.
Yeah, fun for the person playing him, maybe not so much for the person playing against him, but I mean, hey, how different is that from League of 400 years today? The premise of Warwick was very simple. He was your archetypal werewolf character you see in any usual D&D fantasy type game. Attacks using his claws, smells blood to hunt down prey, usually has vampirism of some kind, you know, standard fare for a werewolf. And that's what they acted on. Eternal Thirst was his passive, causing his auto attacks to deal bonus magic damage and heal him for the same amount. Unsurprisingly, this gave Warwick rather exceptional endurance on the field. So long as he was attacking something, he would be regenerating health. Hungering Strike would press his win condition even further, a single target point-and-click ability that dealt magic damage, either a flat amount or max out damage depending on which value was higher, and healed him for 80% of the damage dealt. Note that this was not an auto attack, nor did it apply on hit effects, it was an ability, but man was it a good one. In the mid-game, Warwick's Q would heal him for upwards of 300 health in a single cast. Already though, we can see a bit of incongruity reminiscent of Sion's old kit. Warwick's passive would imply you want to auto-attack as often as possible, but his Q was an ability. It would be one thing if Hungering Strike applied on hit effects, but no, it was just a regular ability. Also, it had an AP ratio of 100%, just like how Sion's Cryptic Gaze had an AP ratio, even though he himself was all about auto-attacks and lifesteal. Fortunately, unlike Sion, that would be the only anomaly for Warwick. Hunter's Call was an attack speed buff for himself that provided half the amount for all allies nearby. A very simple ability, too simple in fact. It's not unusual for old champions to have these one-note abilities that just give stats. Teemo's W is literally just movement speed, and to his credit, if he juiced up his entire team with a rank 5 W, he gives the equivalent of 6,000 gold worth of stats, all for just 35 mana, not the worst steroid out there. Even so, this has to be the laziest attempt at making a functioning spell I've ever seen. At least with Teemo, there's some nuance to it, like not taking damage. Speaking of lazy design, his next ability is Blood Scent, a toggle ability that you should honestly just keep on forever since it doesn't even cost mana. When nearby enemy champions are below half HP, he gets vision of them and bonus movement speed when walking towards them. I gotta say, Warwick had the most boring kit in the game bar none. Q did damage, W was attack speed, E was movement speed. Legit, one modern champion could have all three of these on a single ability and probably more. Mind you, Warwick had a very fair and straightforward design, and contrary to Nunu or Pantheon, fighting against him wasn't too unpleasant. But when you think about all the other auto-attack only champs like Jax, Tryndamere, and the lazy reputation that comes with them, look at previous Warwick, who is even worse. The apple didn't fall too far from the tree with this ultimate either. Infinite Duress was a point-and-click 700 range blink that instantly suppressed the target enemy champion, gaining 30% lifesteal, dealing magic damage, and applying on-hit effects 5 times over 1.8 seconds. When I say instant, I meant it by the way. It was a frame 1 activation, no cast time, and point-and-click. If Warwick was in range of you, he could teleport right on top of you and start whacking it to pieces. 2 point-and-click abilities, a passive and a buff, not a single element of skill expression. You deadass couldn't miss any of Warwick's abilities or attacks even if you tried. The only way to stop him is if you were either really far ahead or had the right team to either kite him out or burst him down. Strangely though, for how telegraphed and unvaried he was, Warwick didn't carry a toxic reputation or balance dilemma, and technically he did have a distinct purpose as an anti-carry, a very effective one. Yes, he was very basic in nature, but no one was particularly bothered by it. So I think the justification behind choosing Warwick to receive a VGU was not based on him directly, rather it was based on those around him. See, an overarching goal Riot's champion team was aiming for was to create a distinct playstyle for every champion, one whose experience would be unique only to them, even if ultimately there were similarities between two members of the same class. Looking at the Skirmisher subclass, the majority of them exert pressure through auto attacks, but are distinguished in some way. Jax's Counter-Strike and can temporarily inflate his durability to rival even tanks. Mastery is Alpha Strike to dodge attacks and the highest auto attack DPS in the game. Fiora dances around you for true damage and counters your hard CC by turning it against you. There were differences between auto-attacking champions back then, but they were so minuscule that the duelist archetype was in the midst of a diversity crisis, or lack thereof. Aatrox, Fiora, Master Yi, Tryndamere, Jax, Irelia, Xin Zhao, Nocturne, it's as if they said, let's make an auto-attacker who could do this, and one who could do that, and one who could do that. It wasn't just rampant among Slayers. Juggernauts had the same problem. Trundle, Udyr, Shyvana, Mundo, Volibear, and our good boy Warwick. There were so many champions whose gameplay consisted of smacking you until you died. You may have noticed that of the 14 I listed just now, 7 of them have gotten full VGUs. One of them was given a brand new ability and had major changes to his ultimate. Tryndamere, Shyvana, and Nocturne are on the roster of candidates for VGUs, and Jax is undergoing a mid-scope update as we speak. So going back to Warwick, I think the motivation behind his rework was that so many champions were too similar to each other. There's nothing wrong with having auto-attacking champions per se, the marksman class is full of them. But as melee champions, you didn't have a whole lot of options for abilities, as you couldn't give them projectiles or that much utility. For example, Caitlyn has her traps, Ashe has cover fire and global vision, Misfortune had her massive teamfight ultimate. You can't exactly give this stuff to melee auto-attackers without defeating the purpose of them being melee, if that makes sense. So they sought to conduct a full-scale overhaul, and Warwick happened to be an easy place to start since he was the simplest in design. They were adamant about maintaining the essential theme of his old version, only portrayed in a way that allows some more player expression. To recap, the key points of his gameplay were as follows. First, he has a ton of sustain. Auto attacks healed him, Q healed him, his ultimate healed him, obviously healing would need to carry over in some capacity. Second, he moved faster towards enemy champions who were low on health, highlighting his ability to smell blood. And third, his iconic ultimate. Suppression's a very rare crowd control to have and shouldn't be given out generously due to being very hard to get rid of. That being said, it's a very core part of the champions who do have it, so naturally they should preserve it. It wasn't that much to work with, which can be seen as a good or bad thing. In Warwick's case, the freedom was very much appreciated, making use of the lax constraints by tapping into the more wolf side of Warwick instead of the human. Enter Warwick's new iteration, with the fancy reveal trailer and everything to boot. Rather than diverging from the stereotypical werewolf trope, they doubled down on it, which in his case was the correct option. He's one of the few champions in League, even to this day, who offers a sense of kinesthetic immersion. In layman's terms, there's a lot of physical realism to his abilities. Eternal Thirst was renamed to Eternal Hunger, but it retains most of the same properties. Basic attacks deal bonus damage on hit, but instead of unconditionally healing him for the same amount, it triggers when he himself is below half health, increased to 2.5 times the damage when down 3/4. My guess is they didn't want to give him infinite sustain like before, which is fair. They make it so you're still in the danger zone even with this passive. Personally, I'm not really a fan of champions who auto-heal back to full HP just by existing, unless they have to pay HP costs like Mundo or Vlad. Warwick's Q is also the same in application, only they made it more skill expressive and harmonious with this kit. Jaws of the Beast, as it's called now, is a targeted ability that deals the equivalent of an empowered auto attack's worth of magic damage while healing him for a portion of the damage dealt, and applying on hit effects like Spellblade, Blade of the Ruined King, and so on. The cool thing is that it's an unstoppable dash that has him lunge forward at a target, and if you hold the Q, he latches onto the enemy champion and leaps behind them. If during this time the target performs any mobility skill like a dash or blink, Warwick will follow their position. This is such a cool ability for how it captures that physical realism I talked about earlier. If Warwick sinks his fangs into you and you try to get away, it's only logical he's going to travel with you. But in gameplay, this adds a ton of outplay potential on what would otherwise be a normal empowered auto attack. When timed correctly, you can use it to ignore all displacement type effects. For example, if Warwick bites onto Poppy after she uses her ultimate, Warwick can stay where he is. Or if you predict when Zed will return to his shadow after casting Deathmark, he screws over the only escape route Zed has. The remainder of his basic abilities, Hunter's Call and Blood Scent, were condensed into his new W, Blood Hunt, passively gaining more attack speed against targets he's attacking if they're below 50% that magnifies if they're below 20% health, likely to illustrate that an enemy champion who's closer to 0 is more injured and possibly bleeding more, making Warwick even more ravenous and feral. Also against enemy champions below half HP, he gains increased movement speed towards them, and a trail that points to their location even if he can't see them directly, which has global range. Another ability that was executed brilliantly. The experience of dropping to all fours when he's chasing down enemy champions who are low on HP when he's normally standing on 2 feet adds more weight and impact to the sense of chasing down opponents. And it's not just a passive attack and movement speed steroid. Warwick's Blood Hunt directly interacts with the new iteration of his ultimate, which I'll get into right now. Infinite Duress is still a suppression that deals magic damage and applies on-hit effects a number of times during the animation. That much hasn't changed. What did change is the way this ability is used. It's no longer a frame 1 point-and-click teleport, rather a free targeted dash that makes him immune to crowd control during it. The cool part is the dash range. Instead of being a flat amount, it's actually based on 250% of his current movement speed, so the faster he's moving, the farther he travels. That's genius. Warwick's Blood Hunt causes him to run faster towards enemy champions who are low on health and get even faster if they're standing at death's door. Realistically speaking, when you're running at 700 movement speed, it should increase the distance of your dash through basic physics. The fact that Warwick is capable of pouncing on you from 2 screens away may seem a little broken, but in contrast to Camille or some other champion with a super long range dash, Warwick depends on momentum. It's also a nice callback to his reveal trailer at the end, where the guy accidentally cuts himself by gripping the shredded metal, and we see Warwick's Blood Hunt activating before he yeets himself over. I love this interaction. There's a lot of feel to Warwick's abilities, and that feel is also put in place to keep him from being too overpowered. He gets almost 300% bonus attack speed from his W, but it only works against heavily injured targets who are about to die anyway. His ultimate is a dash whose range is limitless but depends on his movement speed. His Q allows him to follow champions mid-dash or blink to reflect him grabbing onto them with his mouth, and the displacement immunity symbolizes the immense strength behind his bite to where you can't just shake him off. I'm aware this is just a fantasy game where a literal cat is going toe-to-toe with a creature so massive he devours entire planets whole, and realism isn't really a focus. However, a sense of immersion is the hallmark of good video game design. You want the player to feel the gravity and force behind their attacks. It's the same reason Darius' ultimate animation is so outlandish, that huge satisfaction of dunking an enemy champion. It's those small details that matter the most. Oh, I forgot to mention Z, my bad. Primal Howl also has a narrative purpose too. Application-wise, it's a very good ability to have on a champion who's going to be fighting in the front lines, but the damage reduction is inspired by the sheer resilience given to him through his chemical augmentations to allow him to withstand inhuman amounts of pain and injury, with the ensuing AoE fear rightfully scaring nearby enemies just like how terrifying he was in the trailer. It's also a very convenient engage tool, giving Warwick a very satisfactory engage when he goes into teamfights, pressing E and then using Q or ultimate to get into everyone's face and fearing everybody. God, this champ is so good. I can honestly go on and on about why Warwick is perfect. I dare say his rework is number 1, better than Nunu, better than Fiddlesticks, Volibear, Pantheon. Sure, he may not be the most popular since at the end of the day his gameplay is still pretty linear, but the amount of detail they invested into otherwise very one-dimensional and bland attacks is a testament to what Riot Games is capable of if they actively plan and devise a cohesive gameplay experience. His near spotless balance history can attest to this, having received very few buffs or nerfs for 6 years, making him one of the most balanced and fairly designed champions in the game. An impressive feat to say the least. If you take a second and actually read his abilities, you'll notice how ridiculously overloaded he is, yet it doesn't feel insurmountable to go up against because everything has a condition or restriction that prevents those numbers from going out of control. That, and he's still a single target auto attacker, there's only so much he can do. I don't think they'll ever be able to top this rework. It's the best redesign of a champion I've ever seen, and I've been around for every VGU we've had so far. Others may come close, but in my humble opinion, Warwick's rework is a perfect masterpiece, from gameplay to playstyle to narrative lore, everything. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you have, please leave a like and sub to the channel, I really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other rework retrospectives if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.